I'm Al Regnery. I'm the president of Republic Book Publishers. We are a book publisher that is located not far from Washington, D.C., and we publish largely nonfiction books. Very pleased to be here today with David Davenport and Jeff Sikkenga, the authors of a book we recently published called A Republic, If We Can Teach It, Fixing America's Civil Education Crisis. So welcome to both of you. Let me start off by asking, why did you write this book?
Well, later in my career, as I was working at a think tank, the Hoover Institution at Stanford, on matters of politics and policy, I began to think, where could I make a longer term investment in the future of America than just the politics of the day or even important policy questions? Another way I thought about it is we probably aren't going to save the Republic from Washington, D.C. It probably needs to be from deeper soil than that. And so I actually focused on civic education and the state of civic education. And I became alarmed by what I was learning. And so I've actually spent almost the last decade of my career working on various dimensions of civic education, hoping we can strengthen the Republic by improving the education our young people receive.
Jeff, you want to add anything to that? You're the co-author.
Yeah, it comes out, my own interest, of course, comes out of being executive director of the Ashbrook Center. And we're an educational center, and it's been our mission to teach students, teachers, and citizens really the scope of American history and our founding principles. So it's natural to us. We've been doing it since 1983 when we were inaugurated by Ronald Reagan. So it's in the wheelhouse of the Ashbrook Center. But it was great to connect with David because he has an interest not only in civic education, but bringing his analysis of policy to bear on questions of civic education. And in fact, the collaboration came out of David producing a report for the Orrin Hatch Center on civic education, especially on policies connected to civic education. We thought, hey, that's a really, really impressive work. Why don't we expand it to a book that talks about the crisis and the solutions to the crisis?
So I guess it would be fair to say, wouldn't it, that the two of you are as knowledgeable and have as much expertise about civic education as anybody in the country. So as we're pleased to have you both as authors.
Well, we have a lot, and as Jeff said, we actually have complementary areas of expertise. I sort of come at it from a policy point of view. What kind of policies could state governments, especially, and school districts adopt that would improve civic education? Jeff comes at it more from an educational point of view. How can we prepare teachers to do a better job of teaching civic education? So we each have a little different expertise, and I think we complement one another as co-authors of the book.
Well, that's great. So the subtitle is Fixing America's Civic Education Crisis. That's a strong word. Tell me about the crisis and what the status of civic education is in the country and what it is that needs to be fixed.
Well, there are a number of ways to come at this. The place I usually start is by looking at the national report card, the NAEP test, which is a test given to 4th, 8th, and 12th graders all over the country in various subjects. And unfortunately, the test on US history and civics is only given in 8th grade. And when you see those results, you'll understand why we call it a crisis. The latest round of those tests done in 2022 showed that only 24% of America's 8th graders were even proficient or better in government and civics, and an unbelievably low 14% in US history. Similarly, of the 50 to 60 advanced placement tests given around the country, consistently, our scores in US history and government are among the bottom 10% or so. So it's pretty clear that we are not doing a good job of teaching civics. And because of some things I'm sure we'll talk about, what I call the downstream effects of bad civics education, the crisis really comes home to roost.
And I would add that the crisis,
yeah,
I was
expand
just
on
going to
that.
say, yeah, Al, I would say that The other part of the crisis is that not only are we seeing increasing civic ignorance and a loss of civic knowledge, as David was talking about, but and I think it coincides with this and is caused by the fact that that lack of knowledge means that students have less of an understanding of why America and our institutions deserve their respect and support. So Gallup conducted a poll, I think again in 2022, are you extremely proud to be an American? Only 25% of young people said yes. And a much higher percentage of older people said yes. It's the biggest gap in the history of that poll. And I think that is in part connected to the education that young people are getting or not getting about America.
I think a further evidence of the crisis is the very low trust that young people place in their government and in their leaders. Once again, the Gallup does a poll of that regularly, and they are finding the lowest scores I've ever found, that young people in the 20% range is all the trust they have in government. Well, as we say in the book, how can you trust what you don't understand? And so if they don't come to a good understanding of our government and how it works, it should be no surprise that they don't trust it. They don't turn out to vote. They don't participate civically. So it's not just test scores, but it sort of comes out really in young people and their trust and participation in this republic that we believe is so unique and important.
So we hear a lot of these days about the division in this country and the lack of civility, civil discourse, and that sort of thing. Is that part of this problem? Is that a result of the fact that people aren't learning about the Constitution, the Declaration, and how they came to be?
Yeah, absolutely. It's we've always had heated political debate in this country. It goes all the way back to, well, the founding, and the election of 1800 was as tough an election as we can possibly imagine. But the difference is that there's a difference between debate and argument and conflict, division. There's a difference between debate and division. Debate is we share the same principles, but we disagree about what they mean in practice and in policy. Division is we're not even sure we actually have the same principles or understand these words the same way. That's a very serious situation, and that's part of the crisis that we're in.
I personally think that the lack of civic education has contributed to our polarization, and I have encouraged some think tanks to study that very question. But I'm absolutely convinced that we could improve the polarization problem, as Jeff said, if we could all begin to come at questions with some similar understanding of how things are supposed to work and what the fundamental principles are. So if poor civic education hasn't caused some of this, I think it's clearly part of the solution.
So where did the title come from? A republic, if we can teach it. Interesting sort of a play on words. How did you come up with that?
Well, it is. I'm sure many of your listeners will know the story of Benjamin Franklin coming out of the debates and the signing of the Constitution, and being asked by a prominent citizen of Philadelphia as he came out of the hall, "What kind of government have you given us, Dr. Franklin?" And he answered, "A republic if you can keep it." Well, in our view, keeping the republic really relies heavily on civic education. And so just a little change in word there kind of captures what we're about, which is a republic if we can teach it. If we can teach our young people about the republic, then we have a much better chance of keeping it. The founders clearly believed that. In fact, there's very strong evidence, and we cite this in the book, that the primary purpose of early public schools was to create citizens. And of course, we've added a lot more purposes as the years have gone along. But clearly, education is crucial to keeping the republic.
Good. Studies increasingly show that young people, in some cases, actually favor socialism and communism over capitalism and over dictatorial governments, even over our type of government. I assume that's also a symptom of this lack of civic education, and something that you think might be fixed if people get back to where we used to be. Is that correct?
I think that's right. The One of the earliest studies that showed young people sympathetic to socialism, and by the way, there are even studies that show interest and support for communism, which are things that even a decade ago would have been anathema to Americans. One of the earliest studies that showed that young people were sympathetic towards socialism asked some follow-up questions, and one of those was, which do you think ought to be in charge of how the economy works? Should it be markets and businesses, or should it be the government? Well, the some people who said they liked socialism said, well, clearly markets and businesses should be in charge of the economy. So clearly they don't understand what socialism is when they say that. And in fact, there's even some misunderstanding around the country. When Bernie Sanders and Hillary Clinton at the 2016 election, we're talking about Denmark as an example of a democratic socialist country that maybe should be considered more seriously as a model in this country. The prime minister of Denmark had to step up and say, look, we're not a socialist country. We have a market economy, but we do have a large welfare component or commitment. So, even some of our political leaders, I think, don't have a clear understanding of what socialism really is. Just one more example of how I think young people especially, but all of us get off track when we don't have a good common understanding of the basics.
So you've set forth the problem. Certainly part of your book is a prescription as what needs to be done, a blueprint, should I say, of how we can change things so that civic education becomes a staple of the American education system. Could you talk about that a little bit, about some of the things that you have in mind that need to be done?
Yeah, we say, look, that's the crisis. But to know the solution, you have to understand the cause of the crisis. And basically what we argue is the crisis has been caused by doing less civic education and worse civic education. So it's absolutely true that the amount of time spent in school, K through 12, on history and civics and government has gone down over the last decades. There's no question that's true. It's been squeezed out by things like testing on reading and writing, more recently, and mathematics, more recently STEM, science, technology, engineering, and math, and the emphasis on that. As David said in his Hatch report, there's only so many hours in a school day, and there's only so many school days in the year. Something has to give, and unfortunately what has given is social studies, and especially US history, civics, and government. So we're just doing less of it. Some states, only half the states, for example, require a course in American history in your high school year that includes anything about the American founding. And these are going to be for young people who are going out to be voters. So we're simply doing less of it with our young people. And when we're doing it, we make a case in the book, we're doing it worse than we did. And in particular, things like action civics, which says, you don't have to learn about the fundamentals of our history and principles. Go out and do things. Go out and engage civically. Go out and protest. Go out and be active without quite understanding the basis on which you should be active. We're not against, of course, projects like that, but we say you got to have a foundation of knowledge and understanding before you do that. So we've done less of it and we're doing worse of it. The answer is to do more of it and do it better.
So how do you do that?
Well, the more part is really the policy part that I have worked most on, and that is, it's primarily the responsibility of state legislators and state school boards to say how much history and civics we're going to teach in schools. We're teaching very little civics in grade school and middle school, and in most states, frankly, shockingly, not even all states, but in most states, the only requirement in high school is a single government course. So we've got to get our states, state legislators, school boards to require much more civics, to start in the elementary years with what Jeff and I call in the book a layer cake approach to civics. Teach age appropriate material starting in kindergarten, probably in primary school, heavily emphasizing stories. Young people like stories, telling the stories of America, telling about America's heroes, talking about America's holidays. Families at the dinner table talking about the country. in the summer when they go on vacation, stopping to see important sites, battle sites, memorials. And then in middle school, beginning to ask some more complex questions, maybe more about the what in elementary school, more about the how in middle school, and then importantly by high school, getting to the question of why. So we need to scale up with this kind of layer cake of civic education, and we need our state legislators and school boards to require much more of this. So in the co-authoring process, I became the more guy, and maybe we turn now to Jeff, who's the better guy.
Okay, Jeff?
Yeah, there's no question. I think we need to do it better. We need to understand education not as indoctrination, and we stand against that very strongly in the book, and not even just as giving information to students, which they absorb and then regurgitate back on a test and then forget about it 2 weeks later. And I think if folks ask their children or grandchildren, what's history or civics class like, unfortunately, it's too often like that. There's a textbook, you get information from it, you spit it back out on a test, and then you forget it. We say you need to do it better. You need to, instead of using textbooks, use primary documents, especially as you get older and kids can handle that kind of material. Read the Declaration of Independence, read the Constitution, read Lincoln's Gettysburg Address, King's I Have a Dream speech. Read these foundational defining documents of our country. Think through them deeply. Have real conversations in class so that you don't have to cover everything, cover the important things. Because we have to remember that this is about not just about getting information, it's about shaping citizens who are going to shape the destiny of the republic. They have to know the important things and they have to know them deeply. And that's what we say we need to do better at.
So Jeff, I know at the Ashbrook Center, you're launching a 2-year program, I believe, to basically present this to the country and to do whatever you can to get people to do it. Tell us a little bit about that, what you have in mind, what you're going to do.
Sure. We've just launched publicly on July 4th a campaign called Freedom for the Next 250. And part of that campaign, we're raising support for some items, including a guide for those who want to support robust civic education. And the book is a really important part of our campaign to say, when we say we're going to fixing the civic education crisis, these are the kind of things we can do for more and for better. And we're going to highlight that and those ideas. It's really important for those who want to support outstanding history and civics education that they understand it's not hopeless. The situation is critical for sure, but there are good people out there doing great work. And with some of our recommendations and putting those into effect and already practicing them, we can see that where we do it the right way, we get the right results.
So I assume the materials, the curriculum are available for this anywhere in the country, that there are competent people that can teach it. Can you talk about that?
Oh yeah, there's outstanding. We at the Ashbrook Center, we work with students and teachers across the country, and there are outstanding people in the classroom doing really great work. They just need our help. They need the classroom resources. They need themselves a deeper content education. So much of what teachers get is how to teach, but not what to teach. They need content education so that they don't have to rely on a textbook, but they can get into these materials deeply with their students. Those are the kind of programs that we run. That's the kind of education, and we say this in the book, that's the kind of education we need teachers to get, because teachers are absolutely essential to fixing the crisis. We can't fix the crisis unless we give our teachers the opportunity to be great American history and civics teachers. We found, one teacher can teach 5,000 students over the course of their career. That's a huge multiplier effect. But teachers, unfortunately, have not been given the opportunity to get the kind of education they need in order to be the kind of teachers that really have a profound effect for the good, for the long haul for their students. They're out there, they're doing great work, they're trying their best, they're committed professionals, but they need our help.
Do you find that the teachers and the students also enjoy learning about these things? It's not just something that they sort of have to do and then they go on to the next thing. Do they actually get involved and get worked up about it?
It's pretty exciting to see these classes where students, first of all, they in effect, time travel back to the era that's being studied. And one of the points I like to make is when you do time travel in history, you need to remove your 21st century lenses. One of the political problems, if you will, that we have in studying American history these days is when we wear our 21st century glasses and we try to apply our values to what they were debating or deciding, we're missing what really happened in history. So we invite students to take off their 21st century perspective, go back in history, read these debates, read these speeches, read these documents, replay and redo the debates, understand what was really at stake and how that affected the future of the country. Creates way more excitement than reading a couple of paragraphs in a textbook and trying to stay awake. As we say about textbooks generally, there are some exceptions, but textbooks generally range in history, especially between biased and boring. Those are kind of the two choices that we have. So this creates far more excitement. And there's been evidence, there's been evaluations done showing that students are also learning more and they're performing better on comprehensive tests when they have this kind of in-depth education.
So who is the book written for? Who should be reading this?
Well, we hope everybody.
Well, as a publisher, we hope that too. But
we like Ronald Reagan in his closing address at the very end. The warning that he wanted to give the country is that we were not passing along what it means to be an American to future generations. And he said, this really has to start with the family. He said, all great change begins at the family dinner table. And so I think it's important for families to see what their responsibility is to be not only teaching their children about history and civics. I sometimes like to say that civics is better caught than taught. And you're going to catch it from your parents when you see what kind of passion they have about the country and about voting and about participating. So it starts at the family dinner table. So parents and grandparents concerned about their kids, they should be aware of this book. Obviously, state legislators and school boards, superintendents, principals, teachers, and just people who care about the future of the republic. As I said, I came to this subject because I care about the future of America and I'm concerned about its direction. So it's really even a larger story than just an educational book.
Jeff, you want to add to that?
No, I think it's for any education decision maker, as David said, and that means parents, grandparents, everybody along the line, and for citizens who just understand that we have an experiment in self-government that requires people to have the knowledge and habits to be able to govern themselves. And you can't have that unless you have a deep understanding of our history and principles. So it's really for anybody who is concerned about the future direction of the country, and especially those who have children or grandchildren who are going to be shaped by our education.
I would add that maybe a word of encouragement. It's also a short book. It's only about 150 pages, but it's pretty thoroughly footnoted. So it's useful to scholars and experts as well, who can follow the footnotes and see what we've done. But the story itself we tell pretty concisely, and so I think it's not a burdensome read for people.
Well, I commend both of you for writing it, and let's hope that it does have the kind of impact that we want. A book is something that can have an enormous impact, as we know. Whole movements have been made by books, and all sorts of other things by a book. And let's hope that this is one that inspires people to get interested in this, and the school boards and legislators and teachers and all the rest who can, again, institute civics as part of the educational process. So I thank you both very much, and look forward to working with you as we proceed. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Al.